Welcome everybody to the Seaweed Generation blog or podcast, depending on what you're actually reading this medium on. I have with me today one of the leading scientists and seaweed celebrities in the world of seaweed. It's a small world so far. Dr. Mike Allen. I should have asked you that before we started recording, didn't I?
Yeah, that's.
Are you Dr. Mike Allen? Yeah,
I'm actually Professor Mike Allen.
Sorry, Professor. My goodness, how daunting! Professor Mike Allen of Plymouth Marine Labs, who is doing some incredible work in the world of seaweed. Google him; he actually has some press coverage. It's very impressive. Welcome, Mike, and thank you for talking to me today.
No problem. It's great to be here on the web link.
On my web link, yes, brilliant. Cool. So let's just dive straight in and talk about seaweed. So seaweed as a base material, very exciting. I'm super overexcited about it, but I wanted to get someone who actually knows about this kind of stuff to verify that I'm not just talking absolute rubbish, and talk about it as, you know, a base material and the things that you can do for it with it. So I guess just to get us started, I know your background's in microalgae. What led you to dive into the macroalgae world in the very first place?
Oh, that's a great question. I started working on microalgae about 20 years ago. And like seaweed, the macroalgae, there's loads of potential and they're amazing bugs to work on. But the problem with microalgae is the reason they grow so well is because they're tiny little cells surrounded by a lot of water. So to do anything with them, you need to get rid of that water, which is very costly. So I got into sort of playing around with seaweeds a few years back because I sort of recognized that you don't have those dewatering costs with them. So you can just literally pick them out of the water and start drying them that way. So they're kind of like all the advantages of the microalgae, but with less of the disadvantages. So that's why I got into them, because they're man's seaweed biotech.
So for a layman who doesn't know much about microalgae either, what is it about micro and macroalgae that's, you know, terribly useful or interesting?
I guess the easiest way to sort of put it is in a time scale. So people, and you know, you look out your window and you see plants, and you think about the amazing diversity of plants that we have on this planet, and you think those plants have only been around for about 450 million years, whereas our oceans full of algae have been sort of growing away there for billions of years. So I think the cyanobacteria, the microalgae, they evolved about 2 billion years ago, which is 1.5 billion years before land plants even existed. And then the first seeds were around about 1 billion years ago, which is still 500 million years before all the wonderful plants that we see. So you know, if you think about the diversity that we see in our land plants, the algae have all that and a hell of a lot more. So they're full of weird and wonderful chemicals, compounds, metabolites that we can use and exploit. So that's what we're trying to do in my research group.
Nice. So you can do almost anything with them.
I guess you're limited by your imagination, and anything that you think is beyond your imagination, I guess, just needs a bit more time and research.
Okay, well, that's a pretty broad field. Let's narrow it down a tiny bit. So sort of what areas of research are you focusing on right now that you're allowed to talk about?
We're quite diverse in my group. We're looking at seaweed fuels, fertilizers, novel compounds from them, dabble in a little bit of cosmetics, nutraceuticals, as well as pharmaceutical precursors. So we work with a lot of different people who come to us and say, I've got this opportunity, can you find me a seaweed to fit this gap in our industry? So
okay, cool. Okay, still very wide.
Okay.
From my Google searching of you, just to clear up any misgivings, Mike and I have spoken a few times about this, so we're recording this chat, so people who are interested in seaweed can get kind of an introduction to it. One of the things that I noticed when I was Googling you the most was your work on biofuel from seaweed. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, okay, sure. So we have a really cool project running at the moment called Phycomex. So you can check us out on www.
Cool name.
phycomex.uk. And it's where
Psycho with a PH or a...
PH, of course, it is algal related. So this is a project that's been running for a few years now. That started off, maybe had its origins about 7 or 8 years ago with some Innovate UK funding, where we got together with some Mexican collaborators and basically came up with the idea of converting seaweed into fertilizer products. And this has been going really well. We're going into trials at the moment. So, I mean, seaweed have been used for fertilizers for donkey's years, centuries almost, putting seaweed on the land. So what we're trying to do now is try and develop these processes into industrially scalable processes, really. So there's lots of exciting work going on there. But it's
absolutely
sort of it's kind of like the simplest, crudest application of seaweed. You know, if you're going to burn it or throw it on the ground, you know, these are sort of low value applications. So what really interests me is the sort of higher value, more bespoke applications where you're really sort of becoming a bit more intelligent about what you're using these seaweeds for.
What are you most excited about in that area?
Oh, right. That's a very good question. There's a lot of really cool pharmaceutical compounds in seaweeds. So if we get the right partners to partner up with the right pharma companies and things like that, we can go looking for sort of really sort of highly bioactive molecules within the seaweeds. I mean, if we, you know, you heard it here first, if we find a cannabinoid, there really is literally the opportunity there for seaweed, which could sort of revolutionize a certain industry.
The drug industry. Oh, that sounds amazing.
Hopefully legally. But yeah, I mean, you know, there's lots of really cool things within seaweeds that can be exploited. So, you know, we're keen to work on the sort of massive scale, low value stuff, as a sort of smaller scale, higher value stuff as well. So it's really
Yeah, it's I mean, every time I speak to anyone in this field, I'm completely mind blown about the usefulness or the things, like the different things that you can use it for. I mean, I love the sound of a seaweed weed. That sounds great. Well, it markets itself, really, doesn't it?
Exactly. I mean, there's a seaweed we're growing in the lab at the moment, and you know, you just think this is it's in a glass bottle with an air stone in it and a few nutrients, and there's this beautiful red fluffy seaweed growing. And if you feed that to cows, it stops them burping up methane. And you think that's such a simple solution to.
That's brilliant.
You know, you have cows get a really bad rap for producing a lot of methane.
I know, bless them.
They fart it, but it's actually the burps that are the problems. You can just simply feed them a seaweed, and that seaweed makes a compound that inhibits that process. And you just think that's so simple and elegant. And you know, you can almost think about applications where humans are eating seaweeds that are doing not so much the methane, but
some good things,
health and things like that. So
yeah, absolutely. Challenge for you. Can you give us the Latin name of that seaweed? Because I've completely failed to pronounce it every time I've tried.
Oh God, why would you ask me that?
Never mind, moving on swiftly. So
oh my word, do you know, I wrote it down the other day. I can't say it.
Okay, I'll give I'll find someone that can say it, and one day we'll be able to say the name on this blog.
I'll introduce you to the person who sent me the seaweed to cultivate, and you can do a blog with them, and they can.
Oh, okay.
Said.
Sounds amazing. So that one's been grown in a lab. Do you think it could be domesticated and grown in the sea, or is it kind of very precise?
That's a sort of what's known as a feathery red. It is really amenable to growing in the lab. You can grow them in, you know, out offshore as well. They're a bit more challenging because they're a bit more delicate. So the ones that are well cultivated generally tend to be quite hardy and sort of, you know, they're robust. And the feathery reds as well. A lot of them float off, so that they're not tethered to anything. I think there's always a sort of trade-off that, you know, you never find the perfect seaweed. There's always something that's wrong with it.
I don't believe you. There's got to be there has to be a perfect. What's the most perfect seaweed?
Oh, for me, I really love Ulva lactuca. It's
Okay.
also known as sea lettuce. It's just the green leaf that you see when you go down to the beach these days. I love that one because it's great to. It smells beautiful when it's fresh. It's really sweet smelling, and although it does stink when it degrades. So there's the
I was going to say.
it tastes lovely. You can eat it. It's
Mhm.
lovely for processing as a scientist because it's pretty much like a cell thick. So although it's maybe quite wide, it dries out really quiquely.
Oh, interesting. What have you
I
been
love
making with that
the
then?
well, well, we've been you can eat it is the first thing, but you can use it in cosmetics. People use it in face masks and things like that.
Ooh.
I compacted it into a golf tee shape. It, it was called Seaweed then. So I'm working around with plastic plastic alternatives. So I can and sort of shaped it into the shape of a golf tee so that golfers can fertilize the greens when they tee off instead of
lovely
plastic tees behind. So there's lots of, you can do with it. That's just a fun thing on the side.
Did you play golf with it?
Not with the actual seaweed itself, but I have been known to throw handfuls of it at my kids when we're down at the beach.
Oh, okay, cool.
It's great for that as well.
Not quite golf.
But it's a nice biodegradable fun game because quite often when we go down to the beach these days, what's left behind at the end of a long busy tourist day, there's loads of plastic buckets and spades and, and rubbish. Whereas if you play with seaweed, it doesn't matter what mess you make, we'll clean it up after you. So
disposable kids' toys is not a bad idea.
Exactly.
Well, I was going to ask you what was the weirdest thing you've ever heard seaweed being used for so far, but seaweed might be.
Oh, do you know, I've got a prop for this, which I guess is rubber.
Oh my gosh!
Look, this is my favourite thing. It's a plate. Yeah, like a.
Oh.
Which smells terrible.
Yeah, I was going to say it looks a bit funky.
You can break it off. I don't think it tastes terrible as well, but it's actually quite cool. So it's just some sargassum seaweed from the Dominican Republic mixed in with some coconut fibers, and they've made it a beautiful plate that's totally biodegradable.
Would it disintegrate if you put food on it?
I think over time, yes, but I mean, most people don't.
Not immediately.
Over 20 to 30 day time periods. It's only on there for like 15 minutes. So,
put a sauce on, it's not going to just disintegrate and absorb all of the sauce.
Oh, I hope not. I mean, there is a bit of a smell and a texture to it, but I think short-term eating, it's perfect. I think a lot of our plastic that we use is, in society is totally over-engineered. You think like you have a plastic cup and you have a drink of water in it, and that cup's around for 500 years then. Whereas your drink of water lasted a few seconds. Although, it may cause a little bit of discoloration or bad flavor if you leave your water in a seaweed cup for a few days. That's not actually how we use these cups. So.
No, that is true. That is true. So what do you think you could do about the smell on the plate? Is there a way that, or is that the challenge you're going under at the moment?
I guess you need to look at what's important in terms of the function of a product. For me, that isn't important. If it was important and you wanted a plate that lasted longer, you could develop seaweed-derived films to go over the top of it to sort of prevent that. Right.
So you can do pretty much anything with it then.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of really cool companies out there that have got some really cool and fun products that, I think at the moment we're in the stage where seaweed stuff is quite gimmicky, whereas I think if you fast forward 10 to 15 years, these things will be completely integrated into our industrial sort of pipelines and they'll be the norm.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Go on, give some of them a plug. Who's your exciting? Tell us about some of your exciting companies.
There's plenty of different. I don't know. Am I allowed to endorse companies on here? Or, I mean,
yeah, go on. You what you want.
I think there's some great great companies out there with making clothes out of seaweed. Some really cool packaging materials out there. There's some great companies who are sort of, I can't mention them on here, who are developing some really cool sort of pharmaceutical products out of seaweeds and bioactives and anti-aging creams and stuff like that. They're pretty cool. And you know, yes, exciting times for seaweeds.
Yeah, absolutely. So why do you think it isn't like everywhere already? Is there something holding it back?
I think traditionally, people, I mean, most seaweed is cultivated for either food consumption or ingredients, you know, like fillers, agars and things like that, and thickening, emulsifying agents and things like that. And I think there's a lot of know-how there for sort of cultivation for food. For industrial scale stuff, say if you're going to go for fuel and fertilizer and plastic alternatives and things like that, we need to up the scale more. And that will face certain challenges because you know then you're actually going into competition with food. I mean, you know, you don't want to be taking food away from the food chain for human consumption. You don't want people starving. In Western society, we want to feel good about ourselves for using a seaweed derived blue plastic. So, you know, there's always these tensions, and I think that we need to develop the new sort of offshore cultivation systems. And you know, the ocean is changing. You've got climate change going on. You've got tides changing and sea levels rising, and you know, and different weather patterns and things. So there's loads of challenges out there. But also, you know, you've got to remember that we live on a blue planet, not a green planet. So the only room for expansion really is in the sea. So that's the future. You know, if you think about how terrestrial land is used at the moment and all the farmland that we've got going, you can't make the mistakes that, you know, that they did in the Americas, where they just put all that space into biofuel and you know, making bioethanol, because people are going to starve. Whereas if we go offshore with seaweed, people won't starve because it's entirely new. So what we're trying to do is build a new bioeconomy basically around seaweed, and that's the challenge. So there's a lot of learning that we need to do, but God, the opportunity is phenomenal. There's far more ocean than there is land. So, you know,
that is very true. I mean, I have some ideas about how you might answer this question, but ignore what we've spoken about in the past. What do you think the biggest challenges would be of growing it offshore and going, you know, out into the oceans and using them hopefully in a sustainable and not damaging way?
God, there's plenty of opportunity, and there's always going to be pushback from some stakeholders. But I think that the key is going to be working with people and engaging people. So, you know, seaweed cultivation doesn't have to be a threat to the fishing industry, for example. You know, quite often people think, oh, right, if you put in a seaweed farm in there, they're not going to be able to fish in those grounds, and they may be very productive fishery areas.
Right.
In reality, it may actually benefit fishing. And, you know, there's going to need to be research to do that. So, for example, if you have areas of loads of seaweed being cultivated, they might actually, and most likely will become the breeding ground for fish. So time the fish stocks will replenish because there's a safe area. So, you know, it needs to be sort of, you know, we need to consider these things as we're going forward. You know, you've also got, you know, effectively what we're talking about here is colonizing the ocean. So, you know, every country has its offshore sort of land, as it were. You know, you may get into sort of political arguments in international waters and things like that. So it's going to be very interesting. But, you know, none of these problems are new. They've been sort of faced in other guises before. So, you know, it's just a case of working through them as they come off. And hopefully the sort of scales that the seaweed economy will develop to will mean that these really are proper issues. That's what you really want, is sort of over
Well,
these
yeah,
things, because it means
they'd be nice problems to have, I suppose.
Exactly. So, you know, there's plenty of sort of opportunity ahead of us, and you know, you just got to keep your eyes open to the challenges that will arise.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, on that incredibly daunting note, let's go back to something silly. What seaweed would you make seaweed weed from?
Seaweed weed from? Oh God. I don't know yet. If I did, I'm not sure I'd be busy
You
panting.
definitely shouldn't tell me.
But one of the fun things I'm doing, so the reason why I got into seaweed early on was because I wanted something to do with my kids. Because we moved to the coast about 5 years ago. So I bought a seaweed book and then challenged my kids to try and find as many seaweeds on our local beaches as we could. So I think at the moment we found about 55 different types of seaweed just on our local beach.
Oh, wow, really? It's
only, you know, like half a mile long, but you know, if you go there every day and keep looking, you start seeing them. So every time we see a new seaweed, I take it home, stick it in a bag in the freezer. So my wife isn't always happy when, you know, there's a bag of oven chips and chicken burgers and a bag of the latest seaweed that we found in there. But I then take them into the lab and freeze dry them. And I've what we call the seaweed apothecary. So like I say, we're up to about 55 different seaweeds at the moment. So I'll start screening those for cannabinoids when the lab opens up after the COVID pandemic, and other molecules as well that are of interest as well. So other things like pigments and things like that that are interesting, because you know there's a lot of interest in novel food colorings at the moment. So the legislation is changing on synthetic food colorings. So you know these seaweeds have beautiful colors. So there are all sorts of wonderful things inside them. So that's just a fun project that started with me, you know, just me and the kids down the beach, and we'll hopefully go somewhere really cool.
Well, I'm excited for you to get back into the lab too. All right, amazing. I think that's a wonderful 30-minute chat about seaweed. So thank you ever so much. It was a pleasure chatting to you as always.
No problem.
If anyone wants to hear more about seaweed in general, the website for this video and all the other things to do with it is seaweedgeneration.com, and you can check Mike out on his many websites. What's your main website?
The best one to get me on is bluemicrobe.co.uk. That's my group website. So, and there's links to all the websites on there as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike.
No worries. Thanks everyone for listening.